This is Girl Take the Lead podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Andrea Canny, and I've been in marketing leadership positions for over 42 years and have 2 daughters.
I'm Emma.
And I'm Kiki.
And they'll co-lead with me from time to time. This podcast is about looking at women and leadership through the lens of a boomer, which is me.
I'm a millennial.
And I'm a Gen Z.
Together we'll explore the question, what does leadership mean to women today? And our topic this week is about our voice in leadership. And it's not just about the sound of our voice, but finding our voice as well. And we are so excited to have with us as our first guest, Andrea Canny. Yay, Andrea! Yay! In addition to being a beloved sister-in-law and terrific aunt, Bubba is, I'm sorry.
You can call me Bubba. That's okay.
Bubba is her family name. And so I'm so used to calling her that. So now she's given me the okay, I'm going to use it. She is an award-winning actor, director, and producer who specializes in one-to-one masterclass performance coaching. And she was voted vocalist of the decade by BroadwayWord.com in 2020. So she's a star. And I got to tell you, at my wedding, she sang Ave Maria that just rocked me to my core. I couldn't believe how beautiful it sounded. So I'm so lucky to have this talent in our family. Andrea, thank you so much for being here.
I'm so excited. Thank you for thinking of me.
So maybe we can just sort of jump into our topic and talk about voice. And maybe a little bit background, why I thought this was an important topic, and especially for our first episode like this, was that I was working on my podcast and I'm in a class with Kathy Heller, and lots of people were saying they didn't like the sound of their voice in what they were hearing in their trailer, et cetera. And they were referred to Roger Love on YouTube. So I went and listened, and I saw that there was an episode there about leadership and voice. And I have been in business for 42 years, and I never, ever thought about the sound of my voice. And as I started to think about it, I thought, oh, I hope I sound okay. Like
it's like a new insecurity unlocked.
Exactly. So it was just seemed like the perfect topic. And we're so fortunate that you have this expertise to bring to the table for us to discuss. So tell us a little bit about voice and what your thoughts are about voice and leadership.
Well, I think the two main important things are, you've got sound, right? We were talking about how your voice sounds, but I think there's something that's just as important and sometimes more important is your story, what it is you're saying. And so if we delve into the physical sound first, like what is your vocal sound? Do you have a deep voice? Do you have a high-pitched voice? I just was thinking about it today and I was like, oh my gosh, what about Diane Rehm? I don't know if you ever used to listen to her show on NPR, the Diane Rehm Show, and then it turned into A1. And what an amazing show. And in my mind, listening to her voice, she was so intelligent, so concise, had asked the most perfect questions and was so knowledgeable, but I thought she sounds like she's 150 years old. And so I just assumed that this woman was, really, really old. And then I found out she has spasmodic dysphonia, which is a neurological condition that affects the quality of your voice, makes it shaky, slower, and it can't be cured. It can be controlled. But she eventually stopped doing her show, I think in 2016, because it was getting in the way. Or maybe she was bored. I don't know. I'm not her representative, but it was a distinctive sound that may have been off-putting to some people, but I found her story, her content was so captivating. I didn't care what she sounded like, and another thing about that is not only know what your voice quality is, but know your audience. What is it? I mean, we can go down the rabbit hole, I'll go a little bit more into the actual physical sound, but know your audience. What is it they need? Do they need inspiration? Do they need motivation? There are different questions like, do you tend to have an accusatory tone in your speech pattern? Do you not like talking too much, so you just make it cryptic? Does that?
Yeah. I think too, we have a notion of how we're supposed to be, right? Yep. So like, I can remember back when I started my career in 1978, right? I was one of the few women that had gone to business school, and I went right into working at a big corporation. And I think there were like 2 women in this packaged goods kind of marketing group, and lots of men. And I thought I needed to sound like a man, so I would wear the blue suit and the white shirt and have the little bow tie and go deep with my voice. And meanwhile, I would be shaking inside because this whole thing was not natural for me. Mm-hmm. But it was like what I thought I was supposed to be.
And they might have expected you to be that back then. You never know. Another thing is accents and dialects. There are things about, as far as knowing your audience. To some people, somebody who has a deep Southern accent may sound dumb to some people, and to other people, it might be comforting. Mm-hmm. It might be their people, right. So you really have to know your audience in relation to what your voice is. There's also volume, our loud talkers, quiet. The girls here in our multi-generational grouping of females, they're not old enough to know the old E.F. Hutton commercial. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that? When E.F. Hutton talks, people listen.
Right.
We would always whisper it. When E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. And, okay, why do they listen? I guess because E.F. Hutton knows best or something. But sometimes if you're talking too loud, I will stop listening because it's offensive to my energy, my nervous system. But other people, if they are super soft speakers, if they're so quiet, it can sometimes come off as you're apologizing for what you're saying, or you don't know what you're saying, and you're trying to keep it too quiet.
Yeah.
But like the tone of your voice, is it brash, abrupt, accusatory, welcoming, honest, trusting? Then you've got the rhythm and the cadence of your voice. Some people have a habit of ending at the end of a sentence going up. So it always sounds like it's a question, which might in turn make people think, do you actually know what you're saying? Or are you asking me to confirm what you said, But I think the most important thing, sure, of course, we could spend weeks talking about the physical sound, but the story, I think, is your best asset for 2 huge reasons. One is if you have a distinctly unique voice that may or may not distract someone or may put someone off, just address it right at the top, make it part of your story and just put it out there. That way you can enlist them in your story. Tell them the reason why. I've got a girlfriend who she has to take a thyroid pill every day and her voice sounds like a Cupid doll. It's very high pitched and very childlike sounding. And it's just the way she speaks. And it's her physical nature for speech. And so sometimes she may have to just come off at the beginning and go, hey, this is what I sound like, and this is the reason why. So let's just get that out of the way. And now we can move into the content, which is the important stuff. And it basically gives people permission to, in their mind, go, oh, okay. I don't have to make a judgment on them now. Now I know their backstory. So you've kind of already brought your audience in to your personal world by revealing something personal.
Right.
And then the other thing is that a captivating or interesting story also can help people disregard the tone if they at first might think, oh, that's an odd or unique voice I'm not sure I like. But if your content is so good, they can just disregard it.
Mm-hmm.
They just buy into your story. That's why I think story is so important. And the example, I know we discussed this before, but Seth Godin, who is very, very well respected. And he's, from what I heard at PodFest, he is the most Googled Seth on the planet. So if you put in Seth into your search engine, it's going to come up with Seth Godin first. And I bought one of his books because I heard him be a guest on somebody else's podcast. And I thought, oh, some of the stuff was interesting that he said. So I bought his book. And then I started listening to his podcast, and I had to stop listening because I was so turned off by the tone behind his voice.
Mm-hmm.
Like it wasn't the sound of his voice, but he just sounded like he was mean and saying, I'm smarter than you all. I know this. Like, why don't you already know this? Was what it came off like to me.
Mm-hmm.
He could be the nicest guy on the planet. I have no idea. The way I ingest Seth Godin, I have to take little snippets of a written quote or something like that. But I can't listen to him because he comes off so towards you, brash, almost accusatory that I'm like, he makes me uneasy. He may have good things to say, but so that's just an example of how sometimes you can get over it and sometimes you can't.
Yeah. How about you girls? I mean, do you feel like when you are in a meeting that your voice matters? I mean, the sound of your voice matters.
Well, it wasn't until like just now I was really thinking about like how I come off in meetings via my voice. Well, especially since like we all work remotely, like it's become like a bigger, I think, like thing to focus on. I think for me, it's not so much like the tone, like what Andrea was talking about, but more about like the actual verbiage used and like the type of words being used, which I think kind of goes into that whole voice aspect. But like if someone either like even in writing too, like even in like emails in corporate world are worded very specifically so you don't come off as super abrasive, or like in meetings you're trying to use like verbiage that shows that you're like with the in crowd, like, let's align on this, like what are the action items, like those sort of things, like, from a linguistic point of view is what I tend to focus on more than actually just the tone of my voice, as long as I'm not like yelling, obviously. But I think that kind of is like a sort of like bare minimum for any corporate interaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think of like, at my new, like at this kind of like newer job, there's some people on my team that have such distinct voices that it just makes me smile because it's so memorable and so like like this one manager on the team kind of reminds me of like Pikachu. Like Pikachu's her favorite Pokemon, but it's like hyper excited. Like that's how she comes across. And like I feel like when she like talks and like she kind of has like a higher pitched like voice. But even then, because I feel like sometimes higher pitches can come across as like not as strong. I don't know. That's just like my personal, I think, opinion about it. But she's like a kick-ass leader. She's really cool. And like the tone doesn't really matter. Like I feel like her like rapport with the team is what matters. And like we, kind of listen to what she has to say, regardless of kind of if she sounds a little like higher pitched. Mm-hmm. But I think, Andrea, you bring up a good point about like sometimes when like leaders are speaking, sometimes with their rhetoric or how they come across, like you can kind of see their intent like right away. And or just like, even if it's not their intentions, it's kind of like your mind goes there. And I think that's a big part of kind of like being a leader as well is being welcoming, like with your kind of verbiage and your rhetoric and inclusive and not trying to seem like you know everything, because I can't stand that either. I'm like, no. So
that reminds me of something someone said, and I can't remember who it was, but they said the best leaders don't tell you what to do. They ask the best questions, which I thought was really great, because it was addressing, to be a good leader, do you have to know everything and be smarter than everyone? And the answer is no. All you have to do is know, if you're leading a team, you have to know you've got the best people who are the experts in exactly what genre they're in. And then you have to trust them. You check in with them, and then you ask them the best questions, and then Emma, what you said is such a real issue, is the written, because everything's like texting now or emails, and the tone of how you come off. I've got a friend who's a very dear friend, and during this last year and a half, we've been working on a project, and I've had to talk myself down. Like, you think of a cartoon of a cat with like back folded up and just fully extended claws, because literally in an email or a text, he said, "Stand down." And I was like, wait, what?
And I'm sure with no punctuation,
Just
nothing at all.
Period. Stand down, period, on something.
Not the period.
Not the period.
Even granted, it was an exclamation point, but I'm like, if I'm being the nicest person on the planet, and granted, this is months ago, so I've gotten over it a little bit, is like, did you come from a military family? Like, who says stand down? Like,
I know. It's very aggressive. It comes off as like combative.
Yes, to me, it did. And I've had to remind myself that the way he communicates on paper, on email and text, is nothing like the character and personality I get when we're on the phone together.
Yeah. Well, I think that's going to be one of our topics for our podcast, because I think it was you, Kiki, that brought it up, that communication styles are different for generations. And Andrea, I think you brought up the question like, well, why haven't I heard from you? Well, it's because I'm communicating in a different way, right? So I think that's a great topic for us to look at. So I want to also get to this part about voice, finding our voice, even when it's really hard for us.
So I think we've all found ourselves in situations, whether it's a Zoom call or a telephone call or a meeting, where someone in authority, either by title or they've self-appointed themselves as leader, or I've made them the leader in my own mind, has said something, and I've heard it to be racist or sexist, and I want to challenge it. Where that was the case, and it was about me hearing what was said as a challenge to my viewpoint about women having the right to choose what happens to them if they've been a victim.
I had to say something, and I was so in my throat. I couldn't, and I mean, it's one of those points where I thought I would cry because there was so much emotion there for me. Like, what if it was one of my girls in that situation? I care about my girls and how they were dealing with the trauma. So I don't know if you could help us see or strategies that when we get ourselves and we can't find those words in our, we're just not used to talking and debating and, standing with conviction in that moment, and what I tried to do was just sort of stay present and stay there in the conversation, but not engage. And ideally what I want to be able to do is come off as being, really able to, present my point of view, change the mood of the room and lead everyone in a different direction. And, I didn't get very far. So maybe there's some suggestions you all can give me.
One, I'm sorry that you had to go through that, because that's a wretched situation to be put in. And there are a couple things that you can do in surprise attacks like that, surprise situations where something catches you so off guard. I recommend it's the same thing as like when people talk to you about self-defense, have a strategy that have one thing that you're going to do. Are you going to go for the eyes? Or are you going to go for the groin? Or for me personally, I made the decision I'm going to pop their eardrums. And so if you make that decision ahead of time, that you can have some sort of practiced short decision-making script in your head, excuse me, that you go over numerous times, and hope that you never have to use it. But if you bring up the conversation, if you're talking to other women and say, what do you do in these kind of situations? Oh, well, this is what I've practiced. The more you say it out loud to other people, it becomes more, it wills it into existence, and hopefully you will never have to use it. But I feel like that's a way to set yourself up for success. But within that very short, concise script, you have to force the discussion in a different direction. Like, of course, we always come up with ideas in hindsight. And I would have loved, all the Julia Sugarbaker Designing Women diatribes are the best scripts, but, talented script writers had
time
and weeks to write those great things. And then she delivered them amazingly. But I feel like if you definitely lead the next movement and say, like in that situation of sample script I would have in my back pocket now for the future would be like, well, obviously I'm going to have to say, well, that is a bigger discussion and we're going to have to we're going to offline this personally later. But moving on,
Great idea.
Yeah, but in that moment, you're a human. You cannot help but sometimes get sidelined. I mean, when 9/11 happened, I was working in Lancaster, Pennsylvania at a theater, and we had a 2-show day that day. I was at the gym when I found out about it happening, and then I had to go straight to work. And the finale, I had to start singing the finale number of the matinee. I started it off, and it was God Bless America. And I literally, beautiful gown, all dressed up, hair, makeup done, walk out on stage, and I go, huh. That was it. I literally could not get anything out because I was overwhelmed with emotion. I mean, right now, the memory, my ears, my eyes are tearing up because that was such a visceral moment. I didn't know until I was in that moment. That was like a sneak attack. I didn't know I was going to be overcome with emotion. Luckily, I had a cast of people on stage that knew the words to the song and they just started singing. But there will be times when you just have to say, I need to take a moment for myself here. And you have to give yourself permission to have that be okay.
I think that's a good point of taking the time for ourselves rather than feeling compelled to react in the moment. Like,
you don't have to be super people.
Right.
I mean, if it's something where, say you're leading a meeting and somebody says something that has affected you emotionally, but some other people. The best physical thing I can tell you to do is give yourself permission to take the time to take in a deep breath, hold it for a couple seconds, and let the breath out. And then you can direct the conversation whichever way you've practiced to direct it. But just let yourself have it. Like there was, I was watching Obama do his final speech, his farewell speech. And within it, he was thanking Michelle, and he totally gets emotional and, had to take, luckily for him, he had a huge audience that was cheering and gave him physical time to compose himself and wipe his tears. But, just think of what he was thinking, not only the emotion of that, but this is being viewed for all time by millions and millions of people forever and ever and ever. How I handle this emotional experience is important. So, he took a moment for himself. So I think we have to give ourselves permission to do that. But the deep breath in, hold it for a couple seconds, and then the deep breath out is the best thing you can do because it brings your blood pressure down just a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think whenever, like, I think of using my voice, I had, in my previous job, I had a really like difficult discussion with my executive director at the time about my salary. And speaking of voice, I'm gonna like get some water here, but basically I was having a conversation with her about my salary. And I don't know, mom knows this, but ever since I've been young, whenever I have to have difficult discussions, like I cry, like parent teacher conferences, I would cry because like my anxiety would get kind of bad. But
it's genetic. I got it too.
Yeah,
Emma's got it too. Thanks, mom. Thanks, mom.
Or dad. I think it's probably
dad. I don't know about dad. But
I think it's the legacy of women. I don't think we're that different because we definitely have those emotions.
Well, I was getting, choked up because I was kind of in a position, I heard some like difficult things that, kind of hurt my feelings. Like when it came to kind of like that conversation. And it was difficult because, with the small nonprofit, there's no HR. It's just talking to my boss about my pay, and it's uncomfortable. And I started tearing up and I full on cried because I couldn't take it anymore. Like I full on cried. But what I had to use was taking a step back, because I knew that once I give it some time and I compose myself, I'll be able to have more clarity about what I actually want to say and what kind of like impact I want to have. Because I think in the moment you want to say all these like maybe more impulsive kind of like nasty things, but I think it's a really good point that sometimes in those situations, like give it some time and step back. I agree. Like, I think that works best for me, unless it's something really insane, then I'll go off in the moment. But when it comes to like the professional kind of setting, I've definitely felt like I have to kind of like take a step back and, breathe and sleep on it. And then I'll know like what I want to say. And that situation, turned out because it was a really great experience for me to realize, like, hey, I'm going to advocate for myself here, and I did that. And it wasn't a great fit. And so I, went to look for another kind of opportunity, and it came up. So using your voice is so important. And even though I was kind of like frustrated with myself that I cried, I'm proud that I advocated for myself. And I know that other women before me would be proud of that too.
Totally proud of you for that.
Do you feel, Keeks, that was the first time you ever really had to have a very difficult professional conversation that was leading to an emotional response like that?
Yeah, honestly, I did. And I think prior to that, I was really passive when it came to work. When I first started out that, job too, like straight out of college, I didn't really feel comfortable using my voice and advocating for things. When it came to salary, which is like, okay, here's what it is. And I'm like, okay, like I'll be fine with whatever you want. And, like growing and other things, I was so passive, and I never, because I was scared, I didn't want to make anyone upset or kind of rock the boat. But as I've gotten older, my age, but I think just with a little bit more experience, having good role models, I've seen that, okay, it's like, no one is going to stand up for myself other than me. So I have to like say something if I need to. And I think my generation too it's more kind of like out there, for women to kind of like negotiate things and kind of use your voice. I think it's like a little bit more accepted. And like in trainings, they specifically talk about that. I don't know if like,
wait, you got trainings?
Yeah, I had a woman in leadership training, and they talked about negotiating your salary. And
what?
It wasn't that helpful.
It wasn't that helpful.
No, not really. It was just like, it's stuff you could find anywhere. But anyways, that's my kind of experience with taking a step back, seeing what I needed to say. And even though it didn't work out the way I wanted it to in the moment, it opened the door for an amazing opportunity, which I have now. So it was a good practice, because I'll have to use my voice later on too, for sure. So.
And you got to cut yourself some slack. That's the reason why I asked that question, was because it was your first time having to deal with that. So
Yeah.
Hey, man, that ain't bad.
She did better than I did.
Ain't bad for a Pisces, that water sign's going, so yeah, not bad.
Crying.
And Emma, you negotiated your salary too.
That was so painful. Most of my salary, at my last job, I was a consultant, and so I got paid hourly. And the initial scope of the job was very administrative and organizational, and a little bit of operations. So it was more of like a supportive role. And the initial wage that I got was reflective of that. It was still market competitive. Like it was a good wage for me at the time. But I worked I started off as I think it was a 3-month contract started off. Then it became a 6-month contract, which then became a 2-year contract. And so I was very fortunate to like have my contract continuously extended, which meant that like my duties and such became more complex, like more crucial to the whole operation that my team was doing. And I was working with higher budgets. I became my manager's right-hand person, which at the rate hourly wage that I was making it wasn't fair. And so I had to ask for a raise, which like it was very difficult already because I was represented by my staffing firm rather than like I wasn't directly an employee of the company. So whatever their mechanisms were in place, I couldn't take advantage of that. And so I had to figure that out for myself, which was very fun. And I think like early 20s Emma starting out in her career would have seen that and been like, that is too much. I will give up here. But I was very insistent because I not only wanted to practice because I knew I wanted to kick that habit to the curb, but I also knew that like Kiki mentioned, like no one's going to advocate for me. That's not how the world works. I got to advocate for myself. And like, it was a great conversation I had with my therapist today, actually, but that's neither here nor there. So I went through all this trouble I had to talk to a bunch of recruiters. I had to talk to my manager and like their manager and like get everything signed off. And because for the listeners that don't know, when you are brought on as a consultant, the wage that the company agrees to pay is not what the consultant themselves is taking home. There's a fee that the firm takes out. And so my boss had no idea what I was making. And I am so indebted to my boss for advocating for me when she really didn't have to, because I was just a consultant. I wasn't her employee. When she heard that what I was making, she was like, I'll take care of this. Don't worry. They initially rejected my raise. And then my boss like went and like burned down cities. And then I got a 10% raise, which was great. And woo. But I think that like goes to show that like having your own single voice is important, but also using your voice to amplify others when you can.
Yeah.
I think is super important.
Yeah,
because
she used hers to help you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would not have gotten that raise without her, quite frankly. And like, she's still a really important person in my like professional network. And I'm super indebted to her for pretty much giving me my career. But I think it's one of those things that like women supporting women, especially, like that's so crucial to like, I think lifting up like people from me and Kiki's generation who are now like starting out. And so I think the message there is just like, like using your voice to lift others is just as important as finding your own.
Wow, that's a nice way to end even our podcast for today. Is there anything else, Andrea, that you think you'd like to add?
Well, one of the questions that you said, what kinds of voices are more powerful? That you had asked me when we were doing our discussion before the taping. And I think it's just an interesting conversation to have for people in general. Everybody's going to have a different opinion of what power sounds like. Like they always use, even in professional, like say we do conventions or shows, VOG is voice of God. Is, so that's usually the voiceover person who is the main voice. And the reason why they call it the voice of God is because that's what's been historically registered as the most powerful. Mm-hmm. So they've chosen voices like James Earl Jones, voices that sound like a man and that they're godlike because they're booming, and that's powerful to people. But to other people, it might be a different voice, like there's also like say Latin voices or Italian or French may be considered more, more sexy because one, we don't know what they're saying. And two,
but also to your point, like villains in movies having British accents,
Exactly. Like,
yeah.
I mean, come
Star
on,
Wars.
You can't get any better. But I find the answer for me to that question is the most powerful voice I hear are the ones that come from a place of sincerity and honesty, that have a compelling, great energy. And then the least important, but it is still important, is that they have good information or a captivating story.
Yeah. That's very good.
It's the honesty is the biggest thing. And like, if somebody was like, well, how do I sound more powerful? My best advice is find your honesty. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You'll hear all over the place now, find your why, find your why, find your why. I'm like, okay, yeah, but find your honesty.
Yeah, that's really interesting too, because I think what I heard was vulnerability, like being vulnerable, like the way we are on this podcast, right? We're opening up ourselves and telling stories, and that in the past to me would not have been very comfortable, and I wouldn't perceive that to be interesting to anybody. But then I was hiding, like I was hiding in a corporate life, for 42 years and being a certain somebody that I was supposed to be. And now I can just be me, and hopefully that inspires other people, not, that they can just be the girls. You guys can just be you. You don't have to pretend to be anything.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think? Anything else? Do we want to talk about the one takeaway that we all got from this? Maybe. Emma, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think it's one of those things that like I already knew previously, but it's just been like reaffirmed, is it's okay. Like walking away is also a form of, it's a valid form of communication. It's also a statement. Like, saying no, like not really saying no, but like rejecting something is just as powerful as trying to like do a confrontation.
Yeah.
Especially because I think like, when it comes to advocating for yourself and finding your own voice, like voice doesn't have to always be verbal. I think that's the takeaway for me today.
Okay. Kiki, anything else?
I think one of my takeaways is, maybe not like a new learning, but maybe just being like grateful to I think generations before me helping, kind of like be a mentor and just getting in the way for other Zoomers, other Gen Zers, because it's so important and just really helps us a lot. And I think that's for me.
I guess my takeaway is I've always been inspired by the women in this family about how creative they are and adventurous. And I'm so proud of you girls you're not girls, you're women.
That makes me so happy.
And it's just really great to see you succeeding and sticking up for yourself and embracing the vulnerability. And yes, like I'm starting to cry right now. So, it's a thing, but I think there is strength in vulnerability because you're willing to show your humanity. And I think I'm really excited for you all with this podcast because this is, I think, a discussion that across the generations of women who are leaders, who have examples of good leadership above them, and who are being that hand down the ladder below them to the next generation. I think that's my takeaway, is how excited I am about this podcast for you all.
Well, you almost gave me an example of the emotion in my throat and not being able to speak for a moment. But I took a breath and I feel a lot better.
Breathe back out. But
yeah.
Don't pass out.
Right. So we'd like to thank all of our listeners for being with us today.
Mom, what's your takeaway?
Oh, my takeaway. I think it was that I could actually practice being in that situation. And as you said, both of you said, taking the time. I'm a people pleaser. So
wow, shock, horror.
I know.
I did not know that. This is news to me.
I never thought I was until I started a 12-step program and it was pointed out to me like on day 7. And I thought they were nuts because I'm a tough woman. But I am totally a people pleaser. So I think knowing that about myself and realizing that I need to take care of myself in that situation and not really care about the other person so much. I am not enlightened enough to do that. I just want to take care of myself in that moment. And I would just love to be able to channel and, and speak so that I can get that viewpoint out. So there's trauma there for me to work through in those situations. But the more that I take care of myself, the better I'll be able to function in those, surprise attacks, as you called them.
Yeah.
Anyway, shall we try again? We just want to keep talking on this. And I imagine our listeners would love to also hear more on it. And we'd love to have you back, Bubba, so you can come back and join us again. But so we thank you so much for listening to us and joining us on this podcast journey. And we'd love to hear your comments and thoughts. So please subscribe if you're listening for the first time. And maybe go and visit us at our Facebook group, which is Girl Take the Lead. And we'll be posting there about all of our content coming up. And you can be in touch with Andrea if you want to learn more about your voice and maybe some coaching. She can be reached at andreacanny.com. And also there was also your email. Maybe, Andrea, you want to give that out?
Yeah, it's andrealcanny@gmail.com. Or you can also find me on LinkedIn.
Great. Thank you. Love to all. Take care.
Take
Talk
care.
to you next week.
Bye.
Bye.